It's a great pleasure. Thanks for the idea of having Cape Town conversation. And this is an extremely important panel in the day where we are going to take the idea of Global South forward. And our concept and idea that has come up is largely in terms of how we look at this engagement that has already been discussed since yesterday. We are also trying to see how the whole concept of Africa joining the G20 table able to contribute, and also thinking in terms of how the change, how the performance, how the larger architecture, the financial architecture, the economic landscape that we are talking of for the global south would change. And as we know, at this point, roughly two-thirds of the global population is covered by G20. Around 85% of GDP G20 covers, and 75% of global trade. But with addition of AU on the table, we expect the population coverage would go up to 77%. GDP would go up to 88%, so 3% addition in the GDP. And the trade share almost same percent, so it would be 78%. But the population coverage would jump almost from 60% to 77%. So a large number of people would be benefited, and a large gain we are expecting in terms of how this would deliver. As the Kenyan president described this as Africa's voice, visibility, and influence. And the idea is that the AU's addition would bring in this. The reality is that Africa is bearing this disproportionate burden of impact of climate change, and that I think would be extremely important. The challenge here is also in terms of AU's preparedness. To what extent AU is prepared to play that role with the institutions, what kind of knowledge institutions, how do we bring in coherence, how do we bring in experiences that we have seen in the past. And as we all know, Africa has played an extremely important role in terms of coping up with global financial crisis. The C10 that came up had the Central Bank of West African States and the Central Bank of Central African States, supported by AFDB, the Economic Commission of Africa, and also the African Union Commission. So there have been institutional support mechanisms which have strengthened Africa's ability to handle the global challenges, opportunities, and that I think is important in terms of how we look at the new opportunities that are there. As we heard the AU President Azali Assoumani, in terms of bringing in the larger investment opportunities, the larger opportunities in terms of bringing in more employment, more responsible resources, and also his call for having internal investments in Africa. So G20's focus on Africa, G20's ability to bring in the challenges, the changes that we are looking at, and how we see this opportunity going to contribute in terms of this new addition on the big table of G20, where AU was already especially invited international organization, but now they would sit in full swing as member of the sort of community which is deciding on several different dimensions and providing direction in terms of how we go forward. So I have extremely accomplished panel today that brings in fantastic insights in terms of how we go forward. What are the options they see in terms of bringing in the opportunity right at the door of each of the 54 member organization? How do we bring in coherence? And what kind of preparedness is required for next 2 to 3 years as we see the G20 presidency moving from India to Brazil. We just did the handing over ceremony for the T20, the Think 20. And then, of course, the presidency coming to South Africa before it ends up in the United States of America. So I think with this excellent panel, let me bring in Professor Sarah, who has been thinking about the issues which are of great significance in terms of her own ability to see the dimensions of engagement as former Commissioner of Human Resources, Science and Technology for African Union, and somebody who has seen AUs working very closely, somebody who has been looking into the way these challenges are to be addressed and how we can bring in a more coherent voice on G20 from African Union. So, Professor Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much. I stand on existing protocol. Good morning, everyone. Indeed, as the theme of this plenary session says, time for Africa, AU in the G20. Now, given my experience, I believe that the G20 within the African Union has, and as we have moved from the presidencies from India to Brazil, and we'll come to South Africa in 2025, what can we expect in these 3 years of consecutive global South presidencies before the USA? So the first thing I want to say is that African Union's G20 benefits are enormous. And joining the G20, because I was very lucky to listen to the Minister of Foreign Affairs when she was speaking, and I think she has already echoed all our ideas and what we need to do. I think her conversation, her speech was frank and actually nails the points that we need to look at. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, what do we expect? What do we want? What can we see? How do we move forward? Collaboration among African Union and regional blocs present opportunities to address key issues for the continent's development, be it economic integration, infrastructure development, and coordinated efforts on healthcare and education can amplify impact, particularly in science, technology, and innovation. I use the word science, technology, and innovation because I believe that these factors are the threshold on any economy or country's development. When we speak of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, it is that vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own competent and skilled citizens. How do we go about this? Without solidifying our foundation in education, in science, in technology, and in innovation. Beyond this, shared strategies for conflict resolution and fostering good governance is important because where there is no peace, there will be no sustainable development. So additionally, we need to leverage technology for sustainable development and fostering intra-African trade, and this can actually contribute significantly to the continent's growth. But speaking about that, we also need to walk the talk, going beyond rhetorics. The African Union needs also to take responsibilities of what they need to do as Africans first, and then what they need to do collectively in the spirit of Ubuntu, that I am because you are, when they come to the G20. And that is the African Renaissance that we are talking about. So, as Her Excellency did say, she said it very well, that Africa needs to have its own, is it G20? Africa needs to have its own African aid and above that. So the G20 will give us the opportunity for us to fulfill our dream on the African continent, as well as the G20 fulfilling its own focus on inclusivity. And that is what African participation will bring. Then beyond this, the other thing that we need to look at is Africa working collectively in leveraging its new status within the new membership that it has. And this can be articulated well. In the African Union Commission, we have 6 departments. These 6 different departments speaks to the challenges we have in Africa. And they are there to coordinate efforts and strategies and policies that will leverage or bridge the gap concerning these various areas that we face challenges. And it needs to be contextualized and domesticated, because from one region to the other, from one country to the other, it is not the same story. So we have departments like the agriculture, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable development. We have economic development, tourism, trade, industry, and mining. These two departments were restructured during the 2021 reform of the African Union. And then we have the infrastructure and energy, we have education, science, technology, and innovation, health and humanitarian affairs, and political affairs. And when you look at all this, they are all areas that we find the G20 working on to promote sustainable development in the global world. So the African Union coming to join the G20 now is a welcome intervention, because before then, only South Africa represented the continent in the G20. But now, 55 member states are under this, and they will function very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Sarah. Excellent articulation in terms of how the 6 departments within AU would take forward the agenda that you have outlined. I'm so glad that you have emphasized on science, technology, and innovation. You have emphasized on education, and you have emphasized on sustainability. I think they are absolutely important dimensions in the Sherpa track. And as you know, in G20, the other track, which is extremely important, is the finance track. And how do we bring in finance track there, I think is absolutely important for us to take it forward. But I would come back to you on this issue later as to how finance track can be taken in the African Union's performance. But here is someone who has seen it very closely, and Saeed, I'm looking at you in terms of how you are advising and taking forward the working as you work very closely with the chair and the president. So your idea in terms of how the Pan-African network of think tanks, you have been very closely involved. You have also been very closely involved in terms of the performance of the African Union. So how you see, say, this dimension getting shaped, and how the delivery would actually happen? Can I turn it to you now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks to ORF for having me again on this very important discussion. I would like first to thank the Indian government for helping the AU on this process. It was very difficult. But before that, I have to remind you that this process starts with many other previous chairpersons, where there was President Cyril Ramaphosa, President Tshisekedi, and then Macky Sall. All of them went in the same path to make sure AU became full member of the G20. So for Comoros, it was something, our president from the beginning on day one, he said, we have to make sure it's happen. So what we did is he divide the 20 member, as you know, is 19 country and 1 AU as a general organization. So we focus on the country. We didn't make sure they will fully support us. And he sent a special envoy, and we work with all of them. So what was very surprising is we always receive a very warm welcome and very, when I say agreement, we will fully support you. Then my question is, why we took so long to fix this unfair situation? We should be on the table from the beginning. We have more the resources. We have the population. We have the thing that fuel the global economy, but we're outside of the table. So now we are inside. There is many stakes remaining. Among them is, first, we Africans need to make sure who will sit on the table. Because as you know, the commission is itself, the president is elected for 4 years, and the chairperson is just appointed for 1 year. So we have a huge conversation on should we let the commission lead or should we put the president? And I remember having the conversation with my president, the advisor around him while telling him, we think it should be the president because it's more important. But our president answered us, no, we don't need the president and we don't need the president of the commission. We need a special envoy who can be appointed for 2 years and focus on this mission. It's very important to make sure we have someone who will be dedicated to the G20 and make sure he deliver. Because every time we have a promise from the North, every time, whether it's about the debt, it's about development, infrastructure, healthcare, but it's very hard to deliver. So for our president, and I think that needs to be shared with everybody within the African Union, we should not appoint the president of the commission, neither the chairman of the conference of the president. We should find someone who will be dedicated on this and make sure he delivers. That's the first important point I think we need to make sure it's happen. Then, I think becoming member of G20, we were very pleased, but it's just one fair situation we fix among many unfair situations that need to be fixed very quickly. And as you know, if we talk about the financial architecture, the SDR, the special drawing right, Germany itself has the same right as the whole continent in terms of editing those special rights. So it's not fair. We need to fix it. It's not sustainable. It's not about justice. It's about just to make the mechanism work. If we don't fix it, Germany itself cannot have the same rights as 1.4 billion people. We need to find a solution. That's one point. Coming from an island, we have a very important issue on climate change. Climate change, blue economy, it's very important on the agenda. And as you said, how we Africans can change the global agenda and make sure the agenda is work for the whole world, but also work for Africans. That's why we fought for that. We fought to make sure we will be heard, and not only heard, but also put in practice the issue of global climate change, because we are the first one suffering from that. One of the ideas that we put on the table is why we don't create a bank for climate change, bank for disaster. We are the one who are suffering most of on the climate change, on natural disaster. Kenya itself proposed to host this bank and is working on mechanism that African country can contribute, but also we need also donors and other people to put on the table some funds to make sure we have a specific mechanism that can be very quick, very efficient for African country facing climate change. And then one of the big challenge remain the Security Council. It cannot continue anymore. The last time President Biden went to India and declared he will pledge for changing the situation, making sure India became member of the Security Council. That's a good idea, but he was saying that because of China. And we Africans, we also need to be on the table, and we need to make sure we change the global governance. So, of course, we heard Her Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs from South Africa saying previously, many Western countries are very happy to go in Zambia, Congo, or Tanzania for raw materials. But this situation needs to change. You need the raw materials, so please, let's sit down and talk about how we can build the factory in Africa and make sure the job and the value add is from the continent. So those are some key questions we need to challenge and make sure we deliver on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Said. Big hand to him. I think you have made very important point, both in terms of the internal governance that is required and the idea of having specific responsibilities, but also AU navigating this crucial balancing act that AU would have to do as a member. And I think this would be absolutely important. Friends and colleagues, as we know, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies has emerged as one of the major think tanks in the region. And as AU prepares for this new role, think tanks and research institutions have a major responsibility. Dr. Latif, we are extremely delighted to have you with us as Executive Director of this very important research institution. Your own specialization in the realm of finance is extremely important, something that I was mentioning to Professor Sarah on how we see delivery by AU both on Sherpa track as well as on finance track. And here we see your role and your idea in terms of how the financial architecture can be reshaped, and in what way you see this role being addressed by African Union.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to the Cape Town conversation. It's a pleasure to be for the first time in this beautiful country and in this beautiful city. And before starting, I want to thank Her Excellency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, on her position towards Palestine. As an Egyptian, Arab, and an African, I was very touched by the correct position there. Okay, let me, before answering the question specifically about the finance and the financial architecture and the role of the EU, let me start by saying that Africa joining the EU is a very big win on both sides. This was already mentioned by my two colleagues, but let me be very specific. What does G20 bring to the EU? A lot. The G20 is supposed to be, under the present system, the platform for solving problems, setting the rules of the game, and definitely, instead of being in the periphery on meetings, being an actual member makes a big difference. Putting the rules of the game is more beneficial and more important for the smaller countries than the bigger countries. Thus, its entry is important for Africa. Africa brings a lot to the G20. Okay, for starters, it brings more legitimacy for G20 because of the regional representation. It brings a young population, which means a huge consumer market, and this in itself is a magnet for supply chain investments. It also brings richness in minerals, which are necessary for achieving the green transformation in the world. Okay, and so this is actually a very big plus. So it's a win on both sides, and it was demanded and requested many times before. All right, on the finance part, in order to answer your question, specific question, and whether the EU can have a role in changing the financial infrastructure, there are some efforts in that direction right now. I think the answer to that question lies actually at 3 levels, and it's very important to see them this way, otherwise it doesn't work. Level 0, which is necessary, the EU cannot make any difference anywhere if it does not have its own positioning in the G20. Okay, not just being a member by name, but being a member by action. And being a member by action means that it needs to have a common position as a continent. And that's not very easy. That's a big challenge of arranging the house inside, because there is a conflict between the national interests and the regional or continental interest. As already mentioned by Dr. Sayed, islands are different from continental countries. Landlocked countries are different from the coastal ones. Developed countries are different from the less developed ones, which do not have access to electricity or access to clean cooking. Those differences are huge. It's important to have a good leadership, but it's important to support that leadership, to have discussions, internal discussions, in order to have a common position that makes the EU capable of making any difference inside the G20. Without the common positioning, it will not be able to move forward. And I hope that Africa surprises the world by actually doing that. This was level 0, all right? Level 1, if you want the EU to make any difference in the financial infrastructure, it has to be relieved from its foreign debt burden. It has a huge foreign debt burden, all the countries there. And I'm not talking about the burden of debt to China. This is a commercial one. I'm talking about the debt to the World Bank and the debt to the IMF. This can be actually cancelled because the continent has been um, used, let's not say abused, I'll just say used, by the rest of the world forever, okay? And we all know the situation with the climate, that we're contributing no more than 3% of the damage, but we are subject to all the ills related with the climate deterioration. So this is level one. Level two, and it's really the most important and the most critical, and I'm being very blunt because I'm an economist, I'm not a politician, all right? So this is how I protect myself. I don't think the EU or anybody else, okay, can make a change in the financial infrastructure, okay? Because the change in the financial infrastructure that's being discussed by everybody is taking place within the existing economic system, within the present multilateral system. And it really doesn't make any sense that you are asking the very same institutions that have advantages because of their position to actually personally and on their own step back, okay, and give more for the others. It's not going to work, okay? So neither the EU nor anybody else. The EU can and should play a role if it is ready, but because of this, it's not possible. What is needed, seriously needed, is a complete change in the present system. The present system is like a small box where you are trying to fit an elephant. And the elephant is everything that's happening in the world. The IMF, the World Bank, cannot continue to operate on a voting system that based on the amount of money that is put as share. The Bretton Woods Agreement, which took place after the Second World War, cannot be the one that is guiding the world now. It's completely different. The Global South has 80% of the population and very highly developed countries of their own. So it needs a serious change. This is the precondition for any change in the financial system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Latif. I think you have captured the large essence and also have highlighted the limitations that are there for the kind of changes that one may envisage, and how we go forward in terms of both bringing in rigor in the intervention that the presidency may require at that particular point, but how we bring in the international financial institutions shaping this trajectory for such a change. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Let me now turn to Anita.
Can I add one word, please? Because I think it's very important. I hope that the G20 in Brazil actually will be able to make a difference in that, because the changes in the international system needed, someone with the guts of Lula da Silva is the one that can push forward this.
And we heard all the three great voices from the G20, and they have similarly emphasized this. I think it's great. Anita, you have been somebody who has been very active on environmental issues, both as a very consistent, committed thinker, but also very action-oriented. I wanted to ask you, what would be your recommendation to African Union as they occupy this position? How you view both as a demographer, but also as somebody who is absolutely fascinated with this idea of sustainability?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the role that the most affected groups, and that include youths and women and children, play in shaping our collective future, and that's in the African continent. From the speech that we had today from Her Excellency, the Minister of International Relations in South Africa, she really talked much about the role of young people and how the African continent is rich with the youthful population. And I think for me is to also say that most of the times we stop at calling the most affected people victims, but then we forget that they don't stop at being victims of climate change, but are also at the forefront in providing solutions. Looking at the AU, I think for me it's more of, there's a quote that says, don't ask what your country will do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And in this case, I will speak about the role of young people in also supporting the AU in achieving climate commitments at the G20. And citing the previous the just concluded inaugural Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, where young people came together to organize an African Youth Climate Assembly. that was not coming to ask the leaders about what they want to do for the youth, but literally to showcase the innovations that young people across the African continent have. And that way we were able to bring the president of Africa Development Bank and the president of the Republic of Kenya for them to have an engagement with young people. And we presented a youth declaration that was mainstreamed at the president's declaration, which the ask to the AU was basically to mainstream gender issues, to mainstream youth in their climate discussions. And that will still remain the same, is to make sure that the AU puts the communities that are on the forefront of experiencing what's effects of climate change on the table, because if they are not on the table, then they are definitely on the menu. We want to see the most affected communities being engaged, tapping into the indigenous knowledge and understanding how, for a very long time, even without involving them, how have they been able to build resilience and when it comes to adapting to the existing climate change effects. And another thing, of course, is to say that as we move forward, ahead of COP28, the African Women for Climate have also written what their asks are to the AU when it comes to mainstreaming gender in climate issues. So just to make sure that these are taken into action and into consideration, making sure that the most affected are really on the table of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing in the issue of youth and climate change on table. Friends and colleagues, we had this excellent round with our panel. We have discussed what AU's addition in Africa in G20, making it G21, what kind of trade, GDP, population coverage it brings on table. We discussed about AU's own structure, the departments that are there that Professor Sarah explained, Said mentioned in terms of how this cooperation can go forward. He also emphasized in terms of the delicate balancing act that AU would do. We also heard Dr. Latif telling us about the financial architecture, the rules and the binding commitments that are there. And then Anita told us in terms of expectations of the youth and the commitment for climate change. We are left with few minutes now, and I would very much encourage if anyone has any clarification, voice, any concern, just please give your introduction and please be as brief as possible.
Thank you very much for the panelists. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I believe that we, as African Union, as Africans, we need these relations with G20. We believe that it is a platform for us to exchange our expertise and to develop a platform of cooperation, and also an opportunity to explain our interests in this very complex world and how we could reshape it. But we have to be, I would like to be very sincere with you. We need, first of all, to do our own homework as Africans. And I think the lady has already said it, because the priority for us today is to develop a strong, ambitious, and prosperous Africa. We need to work for the regional integration schemes, because working together, we can move forward. And I think what was said by the lady, that she said exactly the same thing, that we need to work, to do our own homework, to build up this strong Africa.
Thank you.
And I will finish by saying that the most important for us, of course, is the creation of jobs, promotion of growth, but also to think how to change this multilateralism. Thank you.
Absolutely right. Dot there. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Any other intervention? Any other observation?
Thank you so much. My name is Camille Firmin from Benin, a member of the Global Diplomacy Lab. Thank you for this session. My first question is regarding how Africa as a continent is enabling the free movement of its own people. Because we are talking about conversation. And it's good for us really to challenge our leaders to ensure that the free movement of people in Africa is a reality, for us to be able to actively contribute to this kind of conversation. in the G20?
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Amor Maclang, Digital Pilipinas and Digital ASEAN. Between the 600 million people in ASEAN, which I feel does not have enough of a conversation with the African Union, I think we're like perfect lovers, twin siblings. Our issues are the same, and yet we don't feel like we have enough voice in the AU conversation. How can we change that? Thank you.
Okay, this is the last one, and just please be as brief as possible.
Yes, I'm Jules Samoti from International Red Cross. Thank you for the presentations. My point is, how can we implement all of this without stability, peace, and security on the continent? Because one of the presenters said we have many conflicts in Africa, which is true, more than 35 armed conflicts on the continent. How this can happen without stabilizing the continent? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Let me turn to the panel, and Professor Sarah, let me begin with you.
Thank you very much. I don't know, but as you're asking this question, the last speaker and the one that, and my brother who spoke about the mobility in Africa, there's only one song I can sing to answer that question. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free ourselves, because we need to have ownership. The African passport is one of the flagship of the African Union. Yet, the Africans themselves, you go to certain countries, they don't recognize the African Union passport. That is one. Secondly, how do we stop these conflicts within Africa, among our countries, even within the countries themselves? How can we stop the divide, this segregation, them and us, etc.? It is us changing, having a mind paradigm shift. Our leaders having ownership, speaking the talk, walking the talk, and going beyond rhetorics. Not lip service, not eye service, but action on the ground, changing the lives of people. It is very, very important. It is Achebe that says that we need to see where the rain started beating us. Because if we do not ourselves diagnose our issues, there is no doctor that will diagnose it for you. You have to speak the truth, transparency, accountability. That is the only thing that can give us that vision of the Africa we want. That integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa. And that peacefulness, a man that is hungry will never be peaceful. Give our youth employment, and then they will no longer hold the guns. Silencing the guns is not holding the guns. Silence their hunger. Silence unemployment. Silence the different gender infrastructure within the country. And then we'll be able to realize the African dream. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are left with 1 minute, 47 seconds. Dr. Latif, may I turn to you now, please?
Yes, I just want very quickly to comment on the very last question, saying that there are lots of conflicts. What are the solutions? I think there is a very important role that has to be played by research in Africa to find solutions. Research that compares, quantifies the benefit from balancing things to, in comparison to looking at your narrow national interest only. This requires serious research by think tanks. That's not happening. The continent is overstudied and understudied at the same time, and most of the studies are done by outsiders and not by its own people. So it's a key issue. And as long as we are going to keep on playing on the financial issue within the system, we are dealing with the symptom of the problem, not the core, so it will never be solved and it will never be fair.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Latif. Anita, any quick response on any question that you heard? Any reaction, any further idea?
As we continue to speak about the power of young people, let's not just stop at speaking about it, and let's not use the young people to tick a box that they were present in this place, but let's literally make sure that we meaningfully engage and tap into their power. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks a lot. Saeed, the major responsibility comes to you. The first question in terms of how do we bring in more momentum to our homework? And that's the question that you started with when you made your comments. Let me turn that question to you, please.
Thank you very much. I think it's an open conversation. The AU itself do its best to make sure African citizens are involved, whether through the regional organization or the continental organization. So think tanks and this kind of gathering help to produce knowledge and ideas that help the continent and the organization to move forward. One thing's on, should we wait to make a peace before we develop the continent? I would like to tell my brother, it doesn't work like that. We try to do everything at the same time. We don't have the luxury to wait until we reach a peace and then we can develop the continent. It's a spreading in the Sahel, in the horn of the continent, and we do our best to make sure we silence it again. At the same time, we fight for the called justice, global governance. So the tasks are huge, and we have to continue.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Said. There is no scope for me to summarize, but certainly, Said, I think you have helped me in terms of capturing the essence, in terms of what homework is required, with almost 12 working groups in G20 and equal number of engagement groups. Both Dr. Latif and Professor Sarah have emphasized in terms of bringing in more gravitas to our preparation. As you, Professor Sarah, very rightly mentioned, that we need technical people to come in. And there is this huge intellectual base that Africa already has. Dr. Latif, you emphasized on heterogeneity across countries, coastal countries, landlocked countries, and many other dimensions that you spoke of. We would need to collate their energies, bring in the gravitas for this larger performance that Anita was expecting for youth and on climate change. So a big hand for my panel, and I hope we have done good on time as well, Shub.